He fell 19,000 feet, still strapped to the torn-off tail of a B-17, bleeding, broken, barely alive. But his hand never let go of the trigger. Days later, they found him in a forest crater, his fist still clenched. What happened before that fall will haunt you. But let's start at the beginning. November 2nd, 1944. Framlingham Airfield, England. The sky was still black when the crew of the Never Sorry assembled beneath the creaking rafters of Hangar 3. Condensation ghosted from their mouths. The air smelled like oil, canvas, and last night's cigarettes. A single lamp buzzed overhead, flickering like it too knew what kind of morning this was. They called the target critical. They called the mission routine. Everyone knew both were lies. The Never Sorry was a B-17 flying fortress that had limped home one too many times, patched with mismatched panels and exhaust streaks that no rain could wash away. But it flew, and it flew with men who understood what that meant. The objective today, bomb the synthetic fuel plants at Luna, Germany's bleeding artery. It was the kind of target you hit once if you were lucky, twice, and you counted yourself already dead. Expect heavy flak around Merseburg, fighters over Halle. The operations officer droned, pointer ticking over maps no one really saw. Luftwaffe scrambled last night. Eyes up, don't drift. Eli Sullivan, tail gunner, 22, stood near the back, silent, arms crossed. His face was clean-shaven but pale, drawn. He was the kind of man who didn't fidget, didn't joke before flights, didn't flinch. His crewmates called him Trigger, partly because of the Browning M2s he mastered like extensions of his arms, and partly because once you started talking to him, he made you stop. He wasn't unfriendly, just focused, always focused, as if he was already in the sky, already under fire. He stood apart as they prepped. He wiped the inside of his turret dome with a rag, then checked and rechecked the belts of 50 caliber rounds snaking into the guns. Finally, he pulled a creased letter from the pocket of his flight jacket, pressed it to his lips, and returned it to the inner lining. No one ever asked what it said, and he never offered. At 0512, Captain John Hargraves, Falcon to the men, walked out in full gear, clipboard tucked under one arm, and gave the thumb up. The crew nodded. No cheering, no dramatics, just ritual. The Never Sorry coughed to life like a waking dragon. Its engines groaned, tires rolling over frost-dusted tarmac. Eli climbed into his turret before takeoff, legs curled, back pressed to cold metal. The frame rattled under him as the aircraft took off with that old, low growl that no one could mistake. Altitude came slowly. The sun threatened the eastern edge of the horizon, but the world stayed steel gray. Mist clung to the channel like memory. By 0745, they were high above the shattered skeletons of bombed towns and burned-out factories. The sky was full of fortresses, over 300 aircraft, formations stacked like cathedral rows. It felt safe. It always did at first. Then came the flak. The first burst tore through the cloud cover just ahead. Black, blooming, thunderous. Each explosion punched the air with a pressure you could feel in your bones. Then came more, a curtain of steel fragments spinning through the formation. "Bandits inbound! 11 o'clock high!" came the voice over intercom. Sharp, urgent. Eli's eyes snapped forward. A cluster of specks closed in fast. Fighters, BF-109s, maybe FW-190s mixed in. He swiveled, tracking, waited. Then, tracer fire. The Never Sorry jolted. A burst ripped through the starboard engine, coughing smoke and flame. The plane dipped, groaned, recovered. Eli squeezed both triggers. His Brownings spat fire, tracers streaking back. He led the attacker by inches. The Messerschmitt peeled off in smoke, spiraling away. "Nice one, Trigger," someone shouted over the comm. Maybe Grady in the waist gun. Eli didn't reply. He never did. More fighters came. Then, flak again. Violent. Closer this time. One round detonated just below the fuselage, the sound like a car crash inside your chest. Another clipped the wing. The cockpit hissed, static. Eli turned to look forward through the fuselage. A hole now gaped just behind the bomb bay. Smoke poured in. Oxygen masks were on. The crew moved like shadows. Still, they pressed on. They dropped their payload over Luna in silence. No cheering, no confirmation. And that's when the second wave came. Faster, colder, deadlier. The Luftwaffe had been waiting. This time, they didn't come in waves. They came like a wall. And the Never Sorry was no longer part of the formation. The Never Sorry wasn't flying anymore. It was surviving. The second wave hit like a storm made of iron. Twin-engined BF-110s and razor-winged FW-190s came from every angle, their rounds punching into aluminum like fists through wet paper. The fortress bucked, groaned, staggered. It was no longer part of the formation. It was prey, and every crewman on board knew it. 2 engines gone, the port wing leaking fuel like a severed artery. The bomb bay doors jammed half open from the pressure burst. Wind howled through new holes in the fuselage, tearing maps, choking voices. The intercom was a mess of static, cut-off screams and short-circuited sparks. In the top turret, Freddie Doyle was screaming. Or maybe that was his death rattle. Eli couldn't tell. He couldn't hear much of anything anymore. His world had shrunk to the trembling steel cocoon of his tail turret, a cracked bubble barely bolted to a dying plane. Through the armored glass, he could see the chaos unfolding. Flames flickering inside the nose section, one wingtip sheared off and spiraling downward like a leaf on fire. The once proud Never Sorry looked like a skeleton in the sky. And then came the moment no one wanted to face. "We're aborting. We're done," said Captain Hargraves over the intercom, his voice a dull echo in Eli's headset. Defeated, cracked. No orders, no rallying cry. Just that one phrase. Abort. The crew didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Eli scanned the sky. Out of the smoke emerged a lone BF-110, circling them lazily, almost peacefully. Its twin engines hummed low, its guns didn't fire. It was stalking, playing. The German pilot held formation just 20 feet off their left wingtip. Eli's fingers hovered over the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. The enemy cockpit canopy opened slightly, and a pale, gloved hand rose slowly, palm facing outward. A wave. Eli blinked. It wasn't mockery. It was surrender? Mercy? But mercy didn't belong up here. Not in this sky, not in this war. Inside the cockpit, Captain Hargraves hesitated. Eli could imagine his face. Sweat-soaked, pale, eyes darting toward the engine gauges. If they bailed, maybe the Germans would let them live. Maybe, but maybe not. That was the problem up here. The rules were made out of smoke and fear. No one knew what came after the wave. Eli's hands clenched the grips of his Brownings, shaking. Then, a flash behind the German. Another aircraft, not American. Another BF-110. It was already firing. Tracer rounds sliced through the air like red needles, straight into the first fighter. The tail erupted in flame, sheared away. The pilot vanished in a blossom of smoke. Pieces of the BF-110 tumbled past the Never Sorry, trailing fire and silence. Eli exhaled. But the breath never finished. A sound. Deeper, closer, wrong. Not enemy fire. From inside the fortress. The fuselage shuddered with a deafening crack. Metal screamed, buckled. The tail section around Eli flexed violently, then tore. Not off, away. One instant he was part of the Never Sorry. The next, he was not. The turret twisted, then snapped. Cables sparked. Insulation shredded like snow in a storm. The oxygen line tore free. The air hit him like ice knives. Pressure vanished. The world spun. The roar of the slipstream drowned thought. His seatbelt cut into his chest as the tail spiraled. There was no floor, no cockpit, no crew. Only him, Eli Trigger Sullivan, and the broken carcass of the tail section, howling toward the earth at terminal velocity. And his hand, still gripping the trigger, still locked in reflex, still trying to fight, as the sky spun into a blur of gray and red and metal fragments. Eli did not scream. He didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes for a moment and pictured a fence line in Nebraska, a dog barking in the distance, his father's voice calling him in for supper. Then the trees came rushing up like a rising wall, and Eli, still strapped into the tail of a dying bird, fell into silence. There is no instruction manual for falling 19,000 feet inside a dying machine. Eli's vision narrowed to black tunnels. Blood streamed from his nose. His left ear was deaf. The broken metal around him roared and twisted like a coffin on fire. He saw the clouds part. Forest. Fast. He should have died. He didn't. The tail hit a tree canopy, slowed, spun, crashed. He remembers nothing of the impact, only the aftermath. Cold, muffled sound, and his right hand, still gripping the 50 cal handles, fused with frost and dried blood. The rest of his body was barely intact, both legs shattered, ribcage compressed, a gash above his temple pulsing red. He tried to crawl, passed out. A shepherd boy found him by accident. German locals wanted to finish what gravity started. But one man, an elderly doctor, whispered, "He's just a boy," and stitched his skull shut with battlefield thread and trembling hands. Eli woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He asked for the letter in his jacket, and then he slept. Eli was repatriated in February 1945 through prisoner exchange. By then, the war was almost done. But not for him. The VA hospital in Illinois became his second war zone. Nightmares stalked his sleep. His legs, rebuilt with steel rods, never walked right again. He refused a wheelchair. He used crutches and silence instead. When asked what happened up there, he'd just say, "It was cloudy." His hand never fully uncurled from the trigger grip. Surgeons could have fixed it. He refused, said it was a reminder, not of killing, but of holding on. A documentary crew interviewed him in 1981. The final shot was Eli, now gray, watching the skies from his porch. "Why do you think you lived?" they asked. He looked at his fist, then at the camera. "I didn't let go." Eli Sullivan died in 1992. No wife, no kids. At his funeral, an old friend, waist gunner Tim Grady, laid a set of Browning handles on the casket and whispered, "He held us all together."